We have an eye on what's happening in Texas and a bit of a fact check for all the people who said concerns about democracy or authoritarianism in last year's campaign against Donald Trump were overblown. Quite the opposite. Indeed, you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see it happening out of Trump's own mouth and in the action on the ground in Texas. You can also look to the vocal backlash to what many people view as an effort out in the open, starting far earlier than some of Trump's last efforts when he was in the first term, which were closer to the election. Now, we are a long ways away from the midterms, let alone another presidential. And yet, it's happening and earlier. And people are against it because democracy remains pretty popular. From town hall protests to Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth, now getting an earful today in Washington.
Breaking news out of Washington that nobody saw coming. Congress is actually doing something, and they're doing it together to stop what critics are calling Trump's silent coup against American democracy. After months of partisan gridlock and political theater, we're witnessing an unprecedented bipartisan surge with Democrats and Republicans joining forces to block Trump's most aggressive power grabs and reclaim congressional authority that's been slowly eroding for years. This isn't just another political squabble. This is Congress literally fighting for its survival as a co-equal branch of government against a former president who's been systematically trying to consolidate power in ways that would make the founding fathers spin in their graves. On October 29, 2025, the Senate passed by a 52-48 bipartisan vote a measure to abolish Trump's tariffs on Brazilian imports, delivering a direct rebuke to his invocation of emergency powers that he's been using to bypass Congress entirely. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing bipartisan groups in both the House and Senate introducing war powers resolutions, budget control measures, and emergency power limitations that would fundamentally reshape the balance of power in Washington. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
There are a range of concerns, and we can't always interpret boos exactly by their intent, but democracy is one of the big issues. Texas Democrats are also trying to stand up against something that most modern Republicans would have criticized any time before the MAGA era, and that they certainly still are suing to stop when it happens to them in California. But this is what Republicans are doing. A blatant power grab in an off-year, unusual time to carry out what Trump demanded, to change the rules in the middle of the game to try to get more seats because they are worried about losing a free and fair election in these upcoming midterms. So California Democrats are saying it's time or past time to fight fire with fire. If Republicans are able to strong-arm these tactics in Texas, California Dems, led by Governor Newsom, say they will cancel it right out using their powers in real time. No more long-winded speeches about precedent and declining republic. They are going to do what they say they need to do to blunt what looks like a very abusive, precedent-breaking effort to redraw and kind of basically steal some of these districts in Texas.
What makes this moment so extraordinary is that we're seeing Republicans, yes, actual Republican members of Congress, standing up to Trump and saying enough is enough when it comes to executive overreach. Representatives like Tom Massey from Kentucky are joining with Democrats like Ro Khanna from California to rein in unilateral military actions and restore Congress's constitutional role in declaring war and controlling the purse strings. The push to repeal or shore up the Impoundment Control Act, which prevents presidents from withholding or redirecting funds without congressional approval, has become a rallying cry for lawmakers who've watched Trump try to rule by decree rather than work through the democratic process. This isn't about partisan politics anymore. This is about whether America remains a democracy with three co-equal branches of government or becomes something closer to an elected dictatorship where the president can do whatever they want as long as they claim it's an emergency. The timing of this congressional uprising couldn't be more critical, especially with the Supreme Court reviewing Trump's emergency actions and preparing to issue landmark rulings that could either validate or destroy his claims to expansive executive power. What we're witnessing is a three-way constitutional showdown between Congress asserting its authority, Trump claiming near unlimited presidential power, and the Supreme Court preparing to referee this historic conflict. Analysts are pointing to Project 2025, that controversial Heritage Foundation plan to expand executive dominance, as the catalyst that finally woke Congress up to the danger they're facing. This isn't just about stopping Trump's current power grabs. It's about preventing a complete dismantling of the administrative state and the system of checks and balances that has kept American democracy functioning for nearly 250 years. When you have members of both parties coming together to defend congressional prerogatives, you know something serious is happening. Let's really dig into what's happening here and why this congressional rebellion against Trump's power grab is so significant. For years, Congress has been slowly ceding power to the executive branch, allowing presidents from both parties to stretch their authority through executive orders, emergency declarations, and creative interpretations of existing laws. But Trump has taken this to an entirely new level, using every tool at his disposal to bypass Congress and implement his agenda unilaterally. He's declared emergencies to impose tariffs without congressional approval, redirected military funding to build his border wall, and threatened to withhold congressionally appropriated funds from states and programs he doesn't like. Each of these actions individually might have been tolerated in the past, but taken together, they represent what constitutional scholars are calling a systematic assault on the separation of powers. The specific legislative measures Congress is now pursuing are fascinating in their scope and ambition. The war powers resolutions being introduced would require explicit congressional authorization for any military action lasting more than 30 days, closing loopholes that presidents have used to wage undeclared wars for decades. The reforms to the Impoundment Control Act would make it a criminal offense for executive branch officials to withhold or redirect congressionally appropriated funds, with mandatory reporting requirements and automatic penalties for violations. The push to limit emergency powers under IEEPA would require presidents to justify any emergency declaration to Congress within 30 days and would automatically terminate emergency authorities after 6 months unless Congress votes to extend them. These aren't just symbolic gestures, these are serious structural reforms that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in Washington. What's particularly interesting is the coalition that's forming around these reforms. You have progressive Democrats who've long been concerned about executive overreach in military matters joining with libertarian Republicans who believe in strict constitutional limits on government power. You have moderate Republicans who are worried about Trump's authoritarian tendencies aligning with establishment Democrats who want to preserve institutional norms. Even some Trump allies in Congress are quietly supporting these measures because they realize that the powers Trump is claiming today could be used by a Democratic president tomorrow. This isn't a normal left-right political divide. It's a cross-cutting coalition united by a shared concern that the presidency has become too powerful and that Congress needs to reassert itself before it becomes completely irrelevant. The Project 2025 agenda that's motivating much of this congressional action deserves special attention because it reveals the broader strategy behind Trump's individual power, grabs this Heritage Foundation blueprint, which many Trump allies have embraced, calls for placing loyalists throughout the federal bureaucracy, eliminating civil service protections, and giving the president direct control over independent agencies that have traditionally operated with some autonomy. It envisions an executive branch where every decision flows through the president's office, where congressional oversight is minimized or eliminated, and where the judiciary is packed with judges who will rubber stamp executive actions. When members of Congress read through this plan, they realized it wasn't just about Trump. It was about permanently restructuring American government to concentrate power in the presidency, regardless of who holds the office. The political dynamics of this congressional uprising are absolutely fascinating and completely upend traditional partisan narratives. We're seeing Republican senators who've been loyal Trump supporters for years suddenly finding their backbone when it comes to defending their institutional prerogatives. The October 29th vote to abolish Trump's Brazilian tariffs included several GOP senators who are up for re-election in 2026 and clearly calculated that defending congressional power is more important than staying in Trump's good graces. This suggests a significant shift in the Republican Party, where at least some members are willing to stand up to Trump when core constitutional principles are at stake. Meanwhile, Democrats are having to resist the temptation to score partisan points and instead focus on building bipartisan coalitions that can actually pass legislation and override potential vetoes. The legislative strategy being employed here is sophisticated and multi-pronged. Rather than trying to pass one comprehensive reform package that could be easily blocked or vetoed, Congress is pursuing multiple smaller bills that target specific aspects of executive overreach. This makes it harder for Trump and his allies to mobilize opposition and increases the chances that at least some reforms will become law. They're also using must-pass legislation, like defense authorization bills and government funding measures as vehicles for these reforms, making it politically costly for Trump to oppose them. The timing is carefully calibrated, too, by acting now, while the Supreme Court is considering Trump's emergency powers and the 2024 election is heating up. Congress is maximizing public attention and political pressure for reform. The international implications of this congressional pushback are significant and often overlooked. America's allies and adversaries are watching closely to see whether the U.S. political system can self-correct when faced with authoritarian threats from within. If Congress succeeds in reining in executive power, it sends a message that American democracy remains resilient and that institutional checks and balances still function. But if Trump prevails and Congress is unable to defend its prerogatives, it signals to the world that America is moving toward a more authoritarian model of governance. This has huge implications for everything from military alliances to trade relationships to the global promotion of democracy and human rights. Looking at the broader historical context, what we're witnessing is potentially a pivotal moment in American constitutional history. There have been other periods when Congress has pushed back against executive overreach: the War Powers Resolution after Vietnam, the Church Committee reforms after intelligence abuses, the post-Watergate reforms. But this feels different because it's happening in real time against an active threat rather than in response to past abuses. The question is whether Congress has the political will and institutional capacity to follow through on these reforms, or whether they'll cave to pressure as they have so many times before. The role of public opinion in this battle cannot be understated. Polling shows that most Americans, regardless of party affiliation, are concerned about the concentration of power in the presidency and support congressional efforts to restore balance. This gives lawmakers political cover to take stands that might otherwise be risky. But Trump still has a devoted base that sees any attempt to limit his power as part of a deep state conspiracy, and he's incredibly skilled at mobilizing that base to pressure Republicans who step out of line. The outcome may depend on whether the broader public concern about democratic norms outweighs the intensity of Trump's core supporters. The economic implications of this power struggle are also massive. Markets hate uncertainty, and this constitutional crisis is creating plenty of it. If Congress succeeds in limiting presidential emergency powers, it could mean more stable and predictable trade policy, which businesses desperately want. But it could also mean that America is less able to respond quickly to genuine economic emergencies. The business community is split, with some supporting congressional efforts to create more stable rules and others worried that limiting executive flexibility could hurt American competitiveness. Foreign investors are particularly nervous, wondering whether America's political system is becoming too dysfunctional to provide the stability they need for long-term investments. As we watch this drama unfold, it's important to remember what's really at stake here. This isn't just about Donald Trump or the current political moment. It's about the fundamental structure of American government and whether we'll maintain the system of checks and balances that has served us for centuries. If Congress fails to defend its constitutional role now, when faced with such obvious overreach, it may never recover its authority. Future presidents, regardless of party, will know they can simply ignore Congress by declaring emergencies and ruling by decree. The legislative branch will become nothing more than a debating society with no real power to shape policy or constrain executive action. But if Congress succeeds in reasserting its authority, it could mark the beginning of a new era of constitutional balance. It could establish clear limits on emergency powers, restore Congress's control over spending and war-making, and remind future presidents that they're chief executives, not kings. It could also inspire similar pushbacks against executive overreach in other democracies facing authoritarian threats. The world is watching to see whether American democracy can heal itself, whether our institutions are strong enough to withstand assault from within, and whether the constitutional system the founders designed still works in the 21st century. The answer to those questions will be determined by what happens in Congress over the coming weeks and months. This is democracy's stress test, and the results will echo through history.